Hi, and welcome to Smart Annual Giving. My name is Donna Mayer, and I'm the editor of smartannualgiving.com. And I'm thrilled you're joining me today because we're going to talk about the most important part of a nonprofit development program, and that is your annual fundraising. Now, although it is so important, I found that most nonprofits don't actually put a lot of focus or effort into their annual fundraising. It's kind of like the neglected stepchild of fundraising. But today we're going to talk about how we can change that within your organization. This is the first of a 4-part series on annual fundraising, and today in part 1, we're going to talk about what an annual fundraising program actually is, and also what it isn't, and why it's so critical for the long-term health of an organization. In part 2, we'll take a look at what makes an ideal annual fundraising program, and what specific pieces you need to put in place to build an effective program. So what are we working towards here? Now, there's a lot that's keeping annual fundraising programs from functioning like they should, and that's both within an individual organization and within the nonprofit sector as a whole. So in part 3, we're going to talk about where we missed the boat and what we need to do to get back on track. In part 4, I'll tell you how to get started from wherever your particular organization might be and how to transform what you're doing right now, step by step, into a strong, effective system. So what is annual fundraising? It is the cornerstone of your development program, or I should say it should be the cornerstone of your development program. And as we go through this webinar, I want you to think about whether or not your annual fundraising program is functioning as a backbone of your development efforts. Is it set up right now to do what it needs to do? Well, what does it need to do? What's the point of annual fundraising? If this were a live webinar, I'm sure someone would raise their hand and say, raise money. And no one's going to argue that it's definitely an important part. In fact, one of our favorite things about annual fundraising is that it's a great way to pay for our operational expenses, things like staff and our rent, things that are hard to fund otherwise. It's also a great way to get donors into the habit of giving each year. And it's also a vehicle for us to ask our donors to increase their giving levels. Now, that's the short-term goal, but there's an important long-term goal as well, and that is to create and nurture a pool of donors who are committed to your mission, who are partners with your organization, and these people are the people that you're going to rely on to provide support over the years. So not just for annual gifts, but for capital projects when they come up, for special projects we need to fund with a major gift, and also through bequests so that we can endow our organization for years to come. Based on those goals, here's a definition of annual fundraising that I find really gets to the heart of what annual fundraising should be about. It should be strategically planned, it should contain a series of activities, and it should be ultimately designed to establish and nurture that broad base of donor support that's going to ensure that your mission is fulfilled over the long term. While we're discussing what annual fundraising means, I want to stop and clarify some things about terminology. The terms that we use in the nonprofit world can be really problematic because they're inconsistent. These terms can mean very different things in different organizations. One example, in some organizations you'll have an annual giving manager, or in another organization that comparable position would be called an annual campaign manager. While in another organization, that same function is called an annual fund manager. The problem is that these terms are being used interchangeably when they actually mean very different things. And in all these instances, what they're trying to describe is someone who manages their annual giving program or annual fundraising program. I have always disliked the term annual fund ever since I was hired as an annual fund manager. And I felt like I should be managing a pool of money at a bank rather than conducting a fundraising program. So I prefer to use the term annual giving program or annual fundraising program to mean the year-long series of activities that raises money for your general operating support. I also want to clarify the meaning of the term annual campaign. I often hear organizations refer to their annual fundraising program as their annual campaign, but an annual campaign is not by itself an annual fundraising program. Rather, it's an important part of an annual fundraising program. An annual campaign is usually held within a specific time frame that has a beginning and an end, and it has a specific financial goal or perhaps a project-oriented goal attached to it. Like in this photo, you can see that in their annual campaign, their goal is to have 13,000 lives changed. So it may be in those kinds of terms. You probably in your organization have some sort of year-end campaign, and that is a type of annual campaign, which is a part of your annual fundraising program. I also wanted to point out that an annual appeal is also not an annual fundraising program, nor is an annual appeal an annual campaign. I once worked for an organization when I first started out in annual fundraising that considered their year-end appeal to be their annual campaign and also considered this their entire annual fundraising program. And as far as they were concerned, that was all they needed to do. And so they just went back to their special events planning. So I want to point out that there are very specific things. An annual appeal is an important part of an annual campaign, which is an important part of your annual fundraising program or your annual giving program. And the money that you raise through your annual fundraising program goes into your annual fund and provides operating support for your organization. The take-home message here is that I want us to avoid considering all of these terms the same thing and really understand the important distinction between all of them. Now that we've talked about what an annual fund is not, let's go back and talk about what it is. So we're going to focus on that goal of building and nurturing our donors using that strategically planned series of activities. So what does that look like? I find it helpful to envision this process as a donor funnel, so where we're working to move our donors through the funnel, and the deeper they go, the greater level of attention they get from us. Now, we all hear a lot about donor retention, and all of us talk a lot about donor retention, but this is actually bigger than retention. Yes, we definitely want to keep our donors in the funnel at some level, but when someone shows signs of commitment to our work, we need to not only recognize that, but we need to have structured ways of offering them opportunities to deepen their partnership with our organization. And this is where we need a system in place to make sure that that happens. And with our annual fundraising program, the primary way donors indicate their interest in our work is through their repeat giving. So this funnel, and in turn our fundraising system, is set up to recognize that repeat giving as the primary indicator for our attention. And then giving level becomes a secondary indicator. Let's talk about the different levels in our donor funnel. In my full annual fundraising systems course, I'll go into each of these levels and how to go about managing them in detail. But briefly for now, many of us keep a list of prospects within our database, and they need to be treated differently than someone who has already given to our organization. Once somebody has given their first gift to our organization, there are certain things that we need to do to inspire them to make a repeat gift. And once somebody becomes a repeat donor, that's when we really need to start paying attention to them. I've highlighted these two levels because this is really the heart of annual giving. These are your repeat donors, and this is really where we need to put most of our energy and focus. They've indicated to us through their repeat gifts that they're really interested in the work we're doing, and we need to give them something to do with that information they're giving us. And these donors who have been giving to you beneath your major gifts threshold, but have been doing this for years and years, really deserve some deeper investigation and also more attention from you so that you can transition them into more engaged partners. And this is the reason why transitional loyal donors are so important to our organizations, because these are our future major donors. When you have a capital campaign come up in the future, these are the people that, if you've nurtured appropriately, are going to be the ones that will help you fulfill your goal. The obvious next question here is, how exactly do we go about moving our donors through this funnel? The stewardship cycle here may look familiar to you, but I like to think of it as looking down onto the top of the funnel from a bird's eye view. So for each level in the funnel, we need to incorporate these communications tasks to keep our donors in the funnel and, whenever possible, move them to the next level. And to do that, we use a variety of tools. Sometimes these tools are organized into an annual campaign or a year-end campaign. Sometimes we use them on their own. But the key here is that it's a specific series of activities. So we're not just using them randomly or when one of our board members or our boss thinks of a great new idea to try. These are strategically planned and scheduled, and the language and the content and the way we're using these tools are written specifically for each level in the funnel. Thank you so much for joining me today for part 1 of developing a strong, systematic annual fundraising program. If you'd like to receive parts 2, 3, and 4, sign up at smartannualgiving.com/videos.